born in Detroit, Polish descent. He was considering a possibility to go to seminary.
I'll let you record it.
Okay. He was considering the possibility of seminary. He wanted to be a Franciscan. And so he joined the Franciscans, and he struggled with his studies. And as time went on, they finally said to him, "We don't think you have vocation to be a Franciscan." So they let him go. Now, one point I like to make with the kids is when you hit failure in your life, what are you going to do about that? A lot of people just say, well, that's the end of that. I'm not doing that anymore. But for him, that failure led him to keep searching. He kept saying, "Lord, what do you want?" And there was a desire to keep going, so he wrote letters to some bishops. And one of the bishops that he wrote to was the bishop of the Diocese of La Crosse. And he said, "I know some Polish." And because of his Polish, the bishop accepted him because we have a lot of Polish, or had a lot of Polish at that time. So he entered the seminary, and he struggled in the seminary. I sat down with one of his classmates about 6 months ago in the seminary, and he said he always had that difficulty. When it came time for ordination, he made a promise. He said, "Lord, if I ever get to be a priest, I'm going to ask the bishop for 5 years to work in the missions." He had been inspired by the mission possibility. And when it came time for ordination, there were reservations to ordain him because of his difficulties in academics. And finally, one of the priests came forward and said, he'll never be the most intellectual, but he will be a holy man. With that, they ordained him. And then he became a priest. He worked a couple years in the Diocese of La Crosse, but then arose again that desire to be a missionary. And he went to the bishop. Bishop held him off for a while to make sure that this was a calling. Eventually, the bishop said, okay. And he was sent to go to Santa Cruz, Bolivia. And the auxiliary bishop of Santa Cruz at that time, his name was Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown then took him to the edge of the city of 40,000 people into the jungle, and he said, "Here's where you build your church." It's like that movie, you build it and they'll come. And so he had to go to Brazil to get 1,000 bags of cement, or a couple thousand, I forget just how many it was. But he lost a lot of the bags because, well, first of all, he's riding on the back of a train, or on the top of a train. If it rains, he loses everything. And he had a white cassock, which is all full of ash from the train. And then there was a bridge out, and they had to portage all this cement. And so some of the Indians stole it, and sometimes it flipped into the water. Eventually got it all to whatever he needed to Santa Cruz, started building the church, and the church collapsed. 3 times it collapsed. And he finally had to get a priest friend of his, Father Al the Pal, who helped serve at, Father Al Wozniak served in Norwalk for a little while at the end of his life, and to help build the church. He built the church in the city of Santa Cruz. He said, we're going to call it the parish of Santa Cruz, the Holy Cross, because Jesus fell 3 times, so our church fell 3 times, so that's what it's called. In the city of 40,000 people, he served for 8 years. At the end of 8 years, and Father Jose returned to the U.S. We've had a priest presence in Santa Cruz ever since. And now 58 is considered the official starting date. And so we're now, I forget how many years, but it's a lot of years, over 50 years, in Santa Cruz. Father Ed Penke just completed in July 50 years in that parish. But when you think of it, how many people's lives have been impacted by our presence of the diocese? How many baptisms, how many first communions, how many confessions, how many confirmations, how many marriages, how many funerals? And so therefore, the door of heaven. That parish now, which used to be a city of 40,000, now is a parish of 65,000 in a city of 2.7 million people. Father Jose left there, and he went to Ecuador for a couple of years. Then he worked in what is called the St. James Society. And then from there he went back to the U.S. and he worked in Thorpe. And in Thorpe there was going to be an interesting assignment, or people that he would get to know, because they would be his future benefactors. When finally the opportunity came to go to Lima, And he was invited to come here in about 1970 because of an earthquake that happened. That's part of it. But there were invasions of people going into the desert part of the city, into a new place called Villa El Salvador. Well, one of these groups of people were from Juarez area, up high in the mountains, where 60,000 people were wiped out in less than a minute from a mudslide. All these people fleeing to the city had nowhere to go. And so the government finally gave them this tract of land called Villa El Salvador. And so they went there. There was about 150,000 people. Unemployment at that time about 80%. People who had jobs earned $1 to $2 a day. It was an impossible situation. And he asked permission to go. The bishop said, I can't, it's not an official assignment. The diocese will not sponsor it. The diocese paid his insurance, his salary, and then he could beg money. And with that, and the benefactors from Thorpe, who gave him quite a bit of money and supported him, he built the parish in Villa Salvador. He built another chapel to St. Joseph. It was during this time that he was there that I was a backpacker. I was traveling through South America. I needed a place to stay. He started the parish in 1971. In 1975, I was in need of a place, and so I heard his name. Somebody contacted him and said, could I stay with him? And that's where that impacted my life. I don't think I'd be here today if it weren't for that visit back when I was 21 years old. And I spent that visit with him and saw him in action. I loved it. And then went back home. Eventually, I'd become a priest, and we would reconnect again. Father Jose, during this time, then met the Holy Father. When he met the Holy Father, he invited him to come to his humble little place in Villa Salvador. Well, a couple years later, in 1985, the Holy Father did come to Peru, and it was decided that he would go to a poor area. And the place that was chosen was Fr Joseph Walijewski, his parish. So in 1985, you will see the spot when we make the tour of Villa Salvador, where the Holy Father came and made his visit, and which at that time was just pure sand. 2 million people spent overnight waiting for him, with bad conditions, and then he inspired them, and the Holy Father even had Father Jose give a talk in Polish. Father Jose always used to say, I don't know what I was saying. I was just speaking whatever words came to my head. And all the people clapped. They loved it. The only person who knew I was an idiot was the Pope. So that visit went by. The Holy Father left $50,000 to help with some work for the poor. And it was chosen by the conference here to be able to give that money to Father Jose to start Casa Hogar. That's why Casa Hogar is called Casa Hogar Juan Pablo II. And it was during this time that he was feeling very much inspired to do this work. The story Father Jose always used to tell over and over and over again was that he saw these children underneath the newspapers, and they came out one morning, and he'd give them something to eat, and he talked to them, and he said, how do you look at these children who are living in this kind of hell and not do anything? How can you go back to your comfortable life? And he said something needed to be done. And that's where he felt inspired. If we're going to transform culture, it's not through buildings. We're going to transform culture through the family and through marriage. We got to start with the children. And so that's where the whole thing started with Casa Hogar. He bought this. This was a big field. And they cut down some of the trees. And they took those trees and made them into an altar, into an ambo, and into the tabernacle. Anybody who's here in the past would have seen those. Those pieces now have been replaced, and they are in the jungle at the parish where he used to serve. Father Jose then took care of a number of years these kids, but it was all on his shoulders. He dies, everybody goes back to the streets. There was no infrastructure. And then in the early 90s, Father said, I've got to have an infrastructure so that when I die, the place will continue. And in 1997, Bishop Burke came down here. And that visit was to determine, are we or aren't we? At the end of the visit, a visit in both Bolivia and Peru, Bishop Burke said, from now on, this Casa Hogar is no longer Father Jose's work. It is the work of the Diocese of La Crosse. At the same time, Father Jose needed a successor. He had an ex-seminarian from Poland staying with him. He had been here for several years, Father Sebastian at that time. And he came to Bishop and said, would you allow him to be a seminarian, get ordained, so that he could be my successor? Bishop Burke agreed to that. He already had years in the seminary. He was sent to learn English, finished up his seminary, was ordained in 1999, went to the Ridge, and he was my assistant for 1 year. The needs got so great down here that in the year 2000, after 1 year being in the Ridge, he was sent down here to become director. At the same time, a young woman named Amber Schowski. She was trained at Boys Town, she and Father, and then they started in 2000 the Boys Town methodology. That's when we went from talking about Boys Town to be really based on that model. And they translated the whole model of Boys Town into Spanish. First time that's ever been done. And so this has been going on for 13, 14 years now. Father Jose retired in the year 2000. He lived here for 1 more year, and in 2001 he moved to Oxapampa. His relationship with Oxapampa had begun a long time ago. Way back in '88 he bought land in Oxapampa, and he wanted to have it as a training ground for kids so that the older boys could learn farming techniques. And so in one sense you could say he was almost directing 2 places at once for many years. He made monthly trips to Oxapampa, which is a 12-hour car ride. It's arduous. And a lot of cliff driving. And so eventually he did start an orphanage down there. And then that closed for a couple of years due to terrorism. And then he got it started up again. In one sense, Father Jose in Oxapampa did everything that he had ever done before. It was all put together in Oxapampa, in Chontabamba, where he was helping out in parishes, doing parish work, where he started a pre-seminary program. And one of those guys actually became ordained a priest, where he ran an orphanage. The orphanage eventually closed after a number of years. And then he said, well, I have one more dream. We will convert this orphanage, what was, into a house for ancianos. It will be a nursing home. And he said, that's my last dream that I have. But then he needed some sisters to take over. Some sisters took over for him, and he said, now I can go. Now I'm done. It was in the year 2006 that he was struggling with a number of illnesses. He celebrated his 50 years in the missions, and we took him to Bolivia to celebrate in January, and then he went back to the jungle. He was suffering with a couple of illnesses, got worse and worse. Near Holy Week, he came here, and on Thursday before Holy Week, on Sunday, Palm Sunday, he celebrated Mass with the kids, and from the doorway down there, he processed up as part of the Palm Sunday procession. He got ill later that day, and he went to the hospital. Monday morning, the doctor diagnosed him with acute leukemia. He said, you're all done. You're not going back to the jungle. Father Jose then that day was in the hospital. That night, Bambi, his brother, went to see him. Alfredo, what's his brother's name? Alfonso. And Father Jose always had a phrase, don't worry, nothing ever turns out right. Because it basically means, hey, look, if you're waiting for things to work in your favor, it's not going to happen. Things always go wrong. Get used to it. That night, when Alfonso left, Father looked at him and said, don't worry, everything's going to turn out well. The only time he ever said it. And that night, Father died. He died the same day he was diagnosed, during the night. And in that sense, his maleta, his suitcase was packed. He was ready to go. His prayer book, ribbon was set. He finished his last night prayers. What a way to live. What a way to die. I came here to the funeral. It was the best, most phenomenal funeral I've ever been to in my life. I have the video of it. And people processed. We had the body in here. We carried the body out amidst all the kids of the school. Girls on the left, boys on the right. And then 1,000 people through the middle. Servers and bishops and priests and sisters and 1,000 people. We processed all the way to the cathedral. And then we had like a victory shouts, Viva, Viva Padre Jose. And at the end of the Mass, they all gathered again, made a procession all the way back, all the way up to the gruta, to the grotto, where he was buried. One of his favorite songs was, they played it as the body was being pushed into the niche. Guess what that song was? It's the only time you'll ever hear that song at a funeral. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, and on his farm he had a cow. They're putting the casket in the niche as they're singing Old MacDonald. And so Father Jose is buried up there. We go up there every Sunday now, and we do little prayers. The process of canonization has begun. We ask for many prayers. I cannot tell you how many people have said to me, he has caused miracles in my life already. Many, many people have said that. I believe that when we talk about the house here at Casa Hogar, we're not just doing a social work, we are doing a work of the Holy Spirit. What I see in Father Jose is a very mission spirit, a desire to serve, to serve, to serve. One of the images that he had that was most common, you don't see it too much, it's a crucified street boy. You'll see it when we go to the parish. Crucified street boy, because he said Jesus is being crucified in the poor today. When we come on a mission trip like this, my hope would be that we set aside a lot of our desire to just tour, so that we might serve. The children here, Father Jose said, when we started the mission trips, and we started them in 96, we did them 98, 2001, 2004, and now there's multiple trips every year that are being made. But he said, don't come here and simply work. Don't just lay sod or paint something. If you do that, that's only the vehicle for us to be able to have an encounter with the kids. Be with the kids to be able to see how they live in their circumstances. There's an exchange that will happen that will bless you and it will bless them. And I see it with every group that comes in. And therefore we ask you, spend as much time as you can with the kids. Try to get to know them and be of service to them. And so whatever opportunities we have for that, we also want you to go to Villa Salvador. I want you to see the parish. I'll give that tour that day. See the parish that Father Jose founded, and to see some of the soup kitchens that are still functioning, to go to the place where the Holy Father worked or met with the people there. That gives you a short rundown. I'm giving one last detail on his life. His mother prayed that she would have a son. His name would be Joseph, that he would be a priest, that he would build a church to St. Joseph, and that she herself would die at a feast day of St. Joseph. She had a son. Her son is named Joseph. Joseph became a priest. When he was in Villa Salvador, he founded the parish of Cristo Salvador, Christ the Savior, and a chapel to San Jose. And she died on March 19, the feast of St. Joseph. Interesting. I think those are just little crowning points that say God has been guiding all of this. I consider it a privilege to be able to walk in the footsteps of Father Jose. And when the bishop asked me to come down here, I said, you don't have to say it twice. I come down here with a full heart, because I feel that somehow my call from as a young boy was to be a missionary, but the door never opened. And for some reason, this past year, the door is opened, and I'm walking through it. But I think all of us is called to be a missionary. I almost came down in 97. It got canceled in the last second to go to Bolivia. And I told the bishop, I said, you know what? I'm going to be a missionary the rest of my life, but it doesn't matter where I am. I can do that just as well in La Crosse. Whether it's working with the Hmong, working with the Mexican community, working in rural parishes, it doesn't matter. And I've enjoyed that missionary life all through these years. But now, for whatever reason I don't understand, God says, now you be down in Peru. And so last year I was 5 months in Bolivia in the parish, and now I just finished 6 months here. But to have walked in Father Jose's footsteps, that is something that you are doing. Consider it a privilege, and that through his life, through the prism of his life, he will teach us how to live a spirituality of mission, so that when we go back home, we can discover the crucified Christ that are right in our own midst, in our own parish. And for you to ask what we call the dangerous question, la pregunta peligrosa, which is, what does God want me to do with my life? Lord, I don't ask for an easy life. I ask for the grace to do something difficult with my life for you and in service to others. Amen.